The president's words, do you think they have an impact on Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation? I mean, there had to be some calculus, some strategy last night before he took the stage.
Well, Stephanie, what we saw was him reverting to his favorite mode, which is campaign mode. He was even using the same lines. When he was accused of sexual assault by more than a dozen women during the campaign, he responded in a very similar fashion, right? He turned it on them.
And over 50% of white women voted for him.
Exactly. 53% of white women voted for him. He did great among non-college women. He also got women with college degrees who were white narrowly. And so I think he's made the calculation that he is going to rally his base. You saw all of those laughing faces around him. And the question is going to be, will he do so at the expense of Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins? But this is what he loves to do. I mean, they were shouting, "Lock her up." Who is her? Right? It's fill in the her. It's the rage of who is the falsely accused. Meanwhile, he began his campaign by saying that Mexico was sending rapists. So I think it's very clear what the president is doing here. He is saying white people are under attack, my people are under attack. You should rally behind Brett Kavanaugh, who, after all, is an elite Republican operative from Yale Law School.
Because girls, they've got it easy these days.
When I was listening to the president talking about, Mom, someone accused me of doing something horrible, a crime I didn't commit. The people, of course, I thought of are the Central Park Five. The boys who were innocent and spent years in jail for a crime they didn't commit. In a sense, the president is right. We have a system that is entirely based, necessarily based on a presumption of innocence. The problem here is that you have a messenger at this particular moment for that message who could not be a worse messenger. If Donald Trump wants to help Brett Kavanaugh, the best thing that he could do is shut up.
Then what does that do to you? You are someone who just a few days ago wrote an article saying if we are going to convict someone based on assumptions, we all better worry about what is in our future. And while I have no angel wings being on fast order for my future, you make a statement like that, and then the president does that. Doesn't that put you in a tough spot?
No, not at all. Look, I mean, what I'm trying to do is be consistent, which is that we have a presumption of a whole system that's not just legal and institutional, but also moral and cultural, which says that we owe people presumptions of innocence. And by the way, we owe that to Brett Kavanaugh. We owe that to Brett Kavanaugh as well. We should not be judging this case on a believability standard. It's why I've consistently called for a thorough FBI investigation to do the best we can to get at the heart of this allegation from Dr. Ford.
To that point, then, Barbara, what is your take that the FBI has a full week to do this investigation, and now we're hearing reports it may be wrapped up as soon as today. And NBC is reporting there could be 40 people with relevant information who haven't been contacted, and the FBI doesn't plan to speak to Dr. Ford.
Yeah, FBI background investigations are very different from criminal investigations. And the White House actually does get to control the parameters of that. And so if they limit the FBI to who they can talk to or the number of people they can talk to, and we know they've limited the time frame, then they can really, in some ways, even control the outcome. And so my concern is that if in interviewing this small subset of people, they don't find anything additional that is significant, they'll reach their conclusion, and they will hide behind the fig leaf of an FBI investigation. Ordinarily, the FBI is tasked with investigating a topic and not talking to specific people. If the terms of who they can talk to is artificially limited in that way, then I don't know that we can really trust the integrity of the outcome of it. And I think what worries me the most is, so if there's a vote and he is confirmed, Brett Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court will forever have an asterisk next to their name if we aren't satisfied that investigation was complete. And you can bet that in the coming weeks and months, all of those 20 people who are not contacted by the FBI will be giving media interviews. So the public's going to hear those stories.
But let's be honest. Let's say he gets confirmed and has an asterisk next to his name. Clarence Thomas has an asterisk next to his name, and he still keep on trucking.
Well, I think that there's a difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault, and I think there will be believability questions that will, I think, tend to erode the legitimacy of the court. And I think in recent years we have seen that, from Clarence Thomas to Bush v. Gore, and now if Brett Kavanaugh is on the court without satisfying the American public that there was a full investigation and that his name was truly cleared, I think that there will be this taint. And then when the court is not legitimate, what does that do to people's respect for the law? And I worry that that will continue to erode as we see this continued assault on our institutions.
Okay, but Mark, do you think the American people will ever be satisfied? Because there is so much politics mired in this. You talk about this, you talk about sexual assault, and then within the same conversation, people bring up Merrick Garland. And while Merrick Garland was treated unfairly, tying Merrick Garland to sexual assault sort of makes me think people are never going to accept Brett Kavanaugh, irrelevant of what the FBI comes up with.
Well, I think people, relatively speaking, accepted Neil Gorsuch. We wouldn't be having this conversation if there weren't these allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, people weren't exactly elated about Neil Gorsuch. Merrick Garland was immediately relevant to that because they got someone in and blocked President Obama's nominee. But, you know, I think, too, 2018 is also very different from 1991. People are more aware of what these types of allegations mean. People are more aware, more knowledgeable about harassment culture and rape culture. I think, and I agree with what Irin said about what Trump is trying to do in terms of rallying the base. He has nothing else to lose. Even if he loses a confirmation, they'll try to keep that base riled up around that issue going into November because he knows he's in serious political jeopardy in the midterms. But I never put a lot of faith myself in the FBI investigation. I just didn't. I was always concerned about that. And now that concern is validated, that we're hearing that the investigation may be over today and that they did not interview as many witnesses as they should have. I don't see how under those circumstances there's any way that the group of four that's holding out, Jeff Flake, Collins, Murkowski, and Manchin, can go forward with this because there's still too much stuff out there.
There's still too much stuff out there, and there's also political polls that they're looking at every day. So if you're focused on political polls and how the country feels about Brett Kavanaugh, then they're really not interested in getting to the bottom of these sexual assault claims. I want to share what the president said earlier on yesterday.
I say that it's a very scary time for young men in America when you can be guilty of something that you may not be guilty of. Doesn't necessarily have to be a woman, as everybody says, but somebody could accuse you of something and you're automatically guilty.
Do you think there's a lot of men who feel that way right now?
Look, I think it's really important that there be neutral processes in which we could evaluate, not just based on who testifies better, not just based on believability. But no, I do not think that the men that Trump is thinking about are not the ones who are going to be falsely accused necessarily. People like the Central Park Five, the immigrants that he defamed with a sweep of his arm when he announced his candidacy. These are the people who are going to get the disproportionate brunt of the criminal justice system. And we still live in a culture where victims are put on trial. I mean, look at what the Senate Judiciary Committee did just in the last 24 hours. They have declined to interview Dr. Christine Blasey Ford again the FBI has declined to interview them at the same time that they are releasing unverified letters accusing her of lying. So if they're actually interested in getting to the bottom of it as opposed to just putting the victim on trial, then why don't they go back and ask her about the claims made in these letters? Why are they just releasing them to the press? And so I think we are still mired in the same situation that we were in 1991 with Anita Hill, which is to say that victims, people who come forward with stories, whether they're true or not, are still more likely to see their credibility put on trial.
Brett, what do you think about what the president is saying? Because people are saying to me every day, what do you think about your sons? You know, how would you feel if it were them? And that question weighs on me.
Look, I think there's some validity to it. And, you know, look, part of the problem that we have with Donald Trump, and I think with every demagogue, is that demagogues don't traffic in outright lies. They traffic in half-truths. And there is an aspect of truth to that, to what he's saying, that there is suddenly this view. I keep hearing the word, you know, white male being used constantly as a pejorative. There have been many cases, well documented journalistically by people like Emily Yoffe, of young men being taken through sort of kangaroo courts on campuses and being charged.
There's also plenty. We keep hearing about these white men falsely accused.
No.
There's quite a few black men who've been falsely accused.
For a whole century.
And by the way, and Emily Yoffe covers that brilliantly in The Atlantic. So I think that has to be aspect has to be taken seriously. It's really incumbent, especially now, and I say this especially among journalists, to try to be as fair and thoughtful and judicious as we can, because we've seen a lot of journalism right now being committed in the Kavanaugh case that shouldn't reach print. Allegations that are coming out of that are thinly sourced and are suddenly front page news. That actually hurts our credibility in the long term.
Julia Ioffe, if you want to read her piece.
I don't buy into that white male victimization that Trump is talking about. If he was talking about Trayvon Martin's family or Tamir Rice's or Laquan McDonald's, et cetera, Sandra Bland's for that matter,
but there
that would
are
make
also
sense.
white men who've been falsely accused.
Well, but let's put it in context, though. False accused by whom?
The Cross players were accused of rape. They didn't rape anyone.
That's one example out of 100 years.
Absolutely, but I'm just saying, if you say Trayvon Martin, I'm also saying...
But even... They're not equal. And not that you're doing this, but there was a whole industry that blew up even on 4chan behind that case that was then used to bring some level of false equivalency of white male victimization. What is really going on is that white men who are claiming victimization are faced with the comeuppance of women finally having the courage to speak up. So every man who says he's victimized by a case having to do with sexual harassment or sexual assault, what he's really saying is he's opposed to women finally speaking with their own voices and charging them with what women for the past century, not the past century, but from 1865 to 1965, were manipulated into charging black men with so that they could be summarily lynched and executed the way Donald Trump wanted the Central Park Five summarily lynched and executed. This is a war on the part of the Kavanaughs and the Trumps of the world and their supporters. This is a war against women speaking up and telling the truth.
All right, I want to ask you quickly before we go, Barbara, I want to get to some of the facts that are coming out about Kavanaugh. New York Times published a letter, a 1983 letter in which Kavanaugh tells his friends about Beach Week. Remember Beach Week, Ralph? Remember when he said it was about, he got sick from spicy foods, where he says they should warn the neighbors that these guys are, quote, obnoxious drunks and prolific pukers. Now, that might seem like nothing, and for everyone out there who's going, didn't lots of people party in high school and college? How big of a deal is it that Brett Kavanaugh did misrepresent who he was in high school and college? And that's why we're getting this onslaught of information, whether it's letters like this or students. I mean, you had students from Georgetown Prep in the last week come out and say who he represented himself as in that testimony isn't the guy I know.
Yeah, I think the big disconnect that we have between people in the debate is, let's remember, this is not a criminal trial. I think people are thinking that, we're presumed innocent and guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. No, this is a job interview. And for someone to lie, especially someone who is going to be an officer of the court, those lies matter. Now, did he lie or not is a matter of fact and needs to be learned. But if he did lie, that's a very big deal in the courtroom. We charge people with crimes for that, for perjury and for false statements. To be the person who is above all of the courts in the land, it's very important. And so I do think it's significant and worthy of investigation.
That letter's proof of perjury disqualifies him from the court completely. It is proof because he signed it Bart.
It is not.
And when he was asked, who is Bart? He said, you have to ask Mark Judge. That's just a fact. Leahy asked him, are you Bart? And he wouldn't acknowledge that he's Bart. It's signed Bart. That's perjury. How is that not perjury?
It's an accumulation
I
of many
remember I
little
was
lies.
a teenager and I remember boasting about drinking much more than I actually did.
How did you say your name?
That's not what Marcus said.
I'm not talking about. I'm talking about
Listen,
he asked his name was Bart.
Just a second. These letters are not dispositive. Yeah, man, I was so drunk. I was so wasted. I wasn't. And so we should take these letters with a grain of salt. This is why this fishing expedition into an adolescent state of mind.
Stolen emails.
Take the letter,
lied about that.
Take the letters with a grain of salt, and then when Brett Kavanaugh gets up and testifies, you know what he could say? You know what? Like every other dude in high school, I was full of it. I talked a bigger game than I actually had. But alas, he didn't. He said he just played basketball and went to church.